last lecture in this session will be given by Professor Carmi J from Elmhurst College, Illinois, and will deal with the following topic: finding distinctive Jewish names in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Thank you,
Please.
thank you.
You have 14 minutes.
14, you said?
No.
Oh, okay. We'll do the best we can.
25.
Thank you, thank you. It's, you know, oh, sorry. Hello, is this okay? All right. It's, you know, the worst time to lecture is before lunch and after lunch, because before lunch people are impatient and after lunch they fall asleep. So you do your best, please. If I hear your stomachs growling, I will try to speed up. I also apologize. This is extremely dry topic. So I'm an urban geographer, and I ventured into names because I needed to. I will explain why here. Let's see. Go this way.
The down button.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Or the up button.
Actually, use it with the mouse.
Oh, okay. Good, good.
Ah,
Thank you. All right. So this is just a teaser. All right. We'll do some maps at the end, but most of what I'm going to talk about isn't really about maps. It's about how we actually locate people and how we find Jews in the United States. So what I'm here we go. Good, good, good. This is what I'm going to try to get across. So the underlying purpose of my research into names, talking about a little bit of the history of the use of the distinctive Jewish names method in demography in the United States, how I modified this method to be useful for a particular place, a city in the Midwest of the United States, Cincinnati, Ohio, which you may or may not know was the home of the birthplace of Reform Judaism in the United States, actually. I'll talk about the method, and then if I have time and your stomachs aren't growling too loudly, I'll show you the maps that this resulted in. So the modified distinctive Jewish names method, by the way, I apologize for reading. If I read, I'll get this done faster. If I talk extemporaneously, this will go for 4 hours. The modified distinctive Jewish names method that I'll be describing was developed to enable a high-accuracy spatial analysis of Jewish residential patterns in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the period between 1940 and 2000. The reason for this was to test the assumption that Jews cluster together in U.S. urban areas long after other immigrant groups who arrived at roughly the same time have already dispersed into the suburban landscape. It's the job of sociologists to explain the reasons for the persistence of Jewish residential clustering, but it's the job of an urban geographer and spatial analyst to investigate the characteristics of the clustering. That is, are the clusters real? Are they statistically significant? Are they random occurrences that just appear as clusters? Are they stable, or do they change in shape and size over time? Are their boundaries clearly defined or vague and irregular? All of these characteristics can be used to support or refute various explanations of the phenomenon. But first we have to find where Jews actually lived. Unfortunately, and this may be a surprise to many of you, the U.S. Census is no help in this case. The decennial U.S. Census, that's the one that covers everybody every 10 years, was mandated by the U.S. Constitution and first taken in 1790, has never asked respondents for their religious affiliation. The U.S. is very unusual in this. Many countries, possibly most, but certainly including the U.K., Canada, and France as examples, do ask about religion. Of course, in the U.S. we ask about race, something that we are very concerned with. The census data then cannot be used to locate Jews in areas of census geography. I chose to use distinctive Jewish names, and from now on I'll say DJNs, to identify individual household addresses because records of Jewish communal and religious organizations for a longitudinal study over a period of time is problematic. Historical records of synagogues, welfare agencies, and Jewish institutions are fragmentary and cover only limited time periods. Detailed name and address records do exist for some organizations in Cincinnati during the study period, but they seldom span more than 1 or 2 decades. While institutional and organizational records can't provide the address data required to map individual households, they can serve to support the development of a list of names whose addresses can be found elsewhere. Jewish names have been used since the early 1900s to estimate Jewish populations in the United States. For demographic purposes, a distinctive ethnic surname must be common enough among the subject group to be representative, but uncommon enough among the general population to be distinctive. That is, a name identified primarily, if not exclusively, with a subject group. In addition to Jews, ethnic research on Hispanics, Koreans, and other Asian subgroups has employed this approach. The most typical example of a distinctive Jewish surname is, thank you, that was easy, Cohen. In 1912, Dr. Joseph Jacobs used what he termed the Cohen method to estimate the Jewish population of New York City. Jacobs counted the number of occurrences of unique surnames of donors to United Hebrew Charities, an organization that oversaw a group of philanthropic agencies. He tallied the occurrences of the 10 names that appeared most often and divided that sum by the total number of names on the list. The proportion of frequently occurring names to the total was approximately 7%. He counted the same names in a city directory and multiplied the results by the proportion of frequently occurring names to estimate the total number of Jews. This was the first recorded use of population estimation based on Jewish names in the United States. Jacobs' method, however, was based entirely on a name's commonality with no regard for the likelihood of its uniquely Jewish association. Also, because the United Hebrew Charities donors were predominantly of German origin, Jacobs' list was, in effect, a list of distinctive German names that resulted in an undercount of Russian Jews. In 1935, Henry Mayer chose 26 what he called Jewish-sounding names in developing an estimate of the Jewish population of Detroit. Mayer's study was included in a compendium of Jewish population studies later, but has remained otherwise obscure. In 1942, Samuel Coase, a psychologist working for the Jewish Welfare Board's Western States Division, was tasked with estimating the Jewish population of Los Angeles. Data to support a population estimate was either unreliable or unavailable. Coe's solution was to refine the Jewish names method to produce a list of names that were both common and distinctive. Coe's method merits detailed description here, because it has served as the basis for DJN lists used either alone or in combination with other methods in Jewish population studies in the US and Britain since its introduction. In a letter to a colleague, Coase described the process of developing his method in detail. There are several little quotes here, so I'll just say quote, end quote. After assembling a group of 20 professional colleagues and acquaintances, including, quote, approximately 50% non-Jews, quote, Coase asked each of them to compile a list of distinctive Jewish names that could be defined as, quote, a name which is rarely associated with any person other than a Jew, end quote. To these names were added a list of, quote, 40 to 50 names that Coase himself had selected arbitrarily, such as Cohen, Levy, Ginsburg, Weinstein, etc. Coase instructed his respondents to exclude from their list those names from his arbitrary list that they did not deem to be distinctively Jewish. The individual committee members returned a list of 160 names. The list was resubmitted to the entire committee with the directive to vote against any names felt not to be distinctively Jewish. All names that received 2 or more votes against inclusion were dropped from the list, leaving a total of 106 names. From this list, Coase distilled a shorter list of 35 names. And here I'm going to read directly from Coase. To determine the most frequently recurring names, we utilized a list of about 20,000 to 30,000 names, which were on file with the Los Angeles Jewish Welfare Fund. These names represented both contributors and prospects for their welfare drives. The names were secured from previous lists of subscribers, organization lists, which included both religious and secular groups, Jewish business firms, etc. The list also included names provided through the Jewish Family Agency and the County Public Welfare Department for those Jews who would normally not be found on any list previously mentioned. For each of the 106 names, we examined the total number of families possessing that name in this, the largest file of Jewish names in the community. On the basis of this count, we established the 35 most frequently recurring distinctive Jewish names. Though at times modified, Coe's abbreviated list of 35 names has served as the basis for nearly every Jewish population survey performed in the U.S. since the 1940s that has used that method. However, none of these studies that use the Coase list refer to its method of construction or contain explanatory notes about the list. This, you are present at, the first public presentation that I'm aware of that describes Coe's method for generating his list. I found this information with the help of archivists at the American Jewish Historical Society, which holds an archive of Coe's correspondence. Before discovering this, I had asked Ira Sheskin at the University of Miami about the origins of the Coase list. Sheskin is one of the leading American Jewish demographers and a co-author of the American Jewish Yearbook, an annual compendium of data on North American Jewish communities. Sheskin has himself written extensively on DJNs. Sheskin told me that, in quotes, "No one knows how Coase came up with the list." Now we know. It's surprising that a research tool that's been used as a standard for more than half a century had been developed and vetted in a highly imprecise, dare I say, arbitrary manner. Before we can use DJNs to locate households, we must assess their reliability. That is, how certain can we be that the addresses associated with any DJN are actually Jewish households? Ira Rosenwake examined the results of a national survey of almost 1.2 million American men and women conducted by the American Cancer Society in 1982. Of the over 1 million adults, 45 years of age and older, approximately 4.6%, nearly 50,000, self-reported as Jewish. Rosenwake compiled a list of the 25 names most commonly held by Jews in the survey. Some of the names were also reported by non-Jews, unsurprisingly. He then established a ranking for each name based on the number of persons with that name who self-identified as Jews and divided that list into quartiles based on the ranking. The survey's large population sample and its national scale eliminated local biases in name selection that would have been introduced by historical immigration patterns. The ranking, therefore, provides strong evidence for distinctiveness, at least for the names in the top quartile. Unlike the Coase list, which were empirically derived, empirically based, but not derived from statistically valid samples, Rosenwake's ranking provides a reliable scale for assessing the likelihood that these names are distinctively, if not altogether uniquely Jewish. So, the list of distinctive Jewish names for Cincinnati that I was looking for so that I could locate households to make maps of Jewish residential dynamics, movement of Jews through the city and suburbs over time, had 4 requirements. First, the names themselves had to meet a verifiable standard of distinctiveness. Rosenwake's ranking of distinctiveness of Jewish names confirms that certain common Jewish names are also frequently found among non-Jews. For example, the names Weiss, Klein, Stein, and Schwartz appear on several lists of common German surnames. Therefore, a list of distinctive Jewish names for Cincinnati must exclude names that are also common among non-Jews, even though they could be distinctive elsewhere. Cincinnati has a large population of German ancestry. The name Weiss, for example, in Chicago, where I live, if you meet someone whose name is Weiss, they're Jewish. In Cincinnati, not necessarily so. Rosenzweig's rankings resulted from a national survey, as I said. So it eliminates that local bias. Second, the list had to be reflective of the Jewish population of Cincinnati. I used 3 exclusively Jewish sources: burial records from Jewish cemeteries in Cincinnati from 1930 through 2000. That's first. Second, the complete list of donors to the Cincinnati Jewish Welfare Fund in 1940. And 3, a list of all donors and prospective donors to the Cincinnati Jewish Federation between 1992 and 2016. The 1940 list includes organizationally affiliated Jews at the beginning of the study period who had the means and the desire to contribute to a Jewish charity. The later Federation list is comprised of donors and prospective donors from a 34-year period that brackets the end of the study period, my study period. The cemetery records span the entire study period, and unlike the other lists, do not necessarily reflect a specific level of Jewish identity or association with the organized Jewish community, only that the decedent had either expressed a wish to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, or that that decision was taken by surviving relatives or others. For the most part in the United States, cemeteries are very much historically separated by religious denomination. Oh, okay, thank you. This answers the third requirement, the inclusion of non-affiliate and marginally affiliated Jews. This is important because residential choice is a function of both internal and external constraints. Jews who choose to live near one another may do so at least in part in order to support their sense of Jewish identity or for ritual reasons. Conversely, a Jew by birth who does not personally identify with Jewish religious beliefs, ethnicity, or culture may still be the target of bias or discrimination in housing if he is assigned the role of Jew by those who might seek to exclude him on those grounds. To put it simply, if a person does not want to rent you an apartment or sell you their house because he doesn't want a Jew living there, he doesn't care if you go to synagogue 3 times a day, every Shabbat, only on Yom Kippur, or never in your life. In America, if your name is Goldstein, you're a Jew. The cemetery list, therefore, includes Jews regardless of their level of affiliation. By the way, Jews could legally be excluded from property purchases or rentals until 1948. However, these restrictive residential covenants were still very much in use in many parts of the United States through the 1970s. Finally, the list had to supply a large enough sample to generate observable patterns. Mapping koans is a good start, but they're a relatively small, though generally consistent proportion of any Jewish population. So, I'm going to go quickly through the sources here. So this just shows you how koans don't really tell us that much. If we look in 1940, here are koans and cones. If we add Levines, Levine, Levinson, and Levy's, we get a better cluster. Okay? We also get more outliers. And the koans, we had very few further out. Right? If we add the additional names, it thickens a little bit, right? It densifies. And if we finally add Bernstein and Berman, we get a much better picture. Point here is koans by themselves don't do the job. No offense to koans. All right, okay. All right. So, let's see. I'm going to skip something because I want to get further along here, so I'm going to move faster. For my source lists, what I did was I basically looked at the number of name occurrences, listed the unique names, the percent of the total that those were, the number of persons that those represented. So basically, you'll see that there are lots of Jews who share common names. That's basically what this is telling you. I'm going to skip about 10 minutes of explaining these, all right? Also, okay, if we look at all of these together, right, we actually have a very good statistical significance that says that all three of these lists, although one was from 1940, one was from 92 through 2016, the other was from 1930 to 2000, all of these lists have essentially the same patterns in terms of numbers of names. I know better than to ask if that made sense. All right, so let me drive through here. All right, so in constructing my own list, right, I sorted the lists in descending counts of percentages of the totals. Right. 14 names from the cemetery list appeared in the top quartile of the Rosenwake list. These names appeared also on the other two Jewish Federation lists. 12 of the names were on Coe's short list of 35 names. Right? Actually, you know what? I won't read this. You can see this. What's interesting, I thought was interesting, was Levi was neither on the Coe's 106 name list or on the Coe's 35 name list. Go figure, right? Clearly, it should be on the list, and I put it on my list. So I'm sort of crunching down. This is what I wound up with through my methodology, which I can describe in detail anytime you're interested. All right. So what this gets us is, this is showing on each one of the lists what percentage of the total each name represented. The N is, there were in the first list 4,125 names total. The cemetery list is almost 15,000. The later Federation list is 18,500. So this shows you where each name fell. Right. So we also have between where each name falls on the list, there's also very strong, for those of you who remember your statistics, right? There's strong correlations between all of those lists in terms of the number of names that are highest frequency and most distinctive. All right, so do I have like 3 minutes? Okay, great. So what did I do with this? This is the fun part. I'm not going to read, I'll just tell you. Once I got 22 names, and I actually added Goodman and Weiss, because Goodman and Weiss are common but not distinctive, right? I went to the library in Cincinnati and I scanned from phone books every single occurrence of those names for 7 decades. Then, this took a whole summer. Then I scrubbed the data, put it into Excel spreadsheets. There was I used optical character recognition software, but there was a lot of manual scrub involved. Yeah, I have nightmares about it still. All right. And then I geocoded these addresses. Geocoding is basically finding a location on the map based on the address. Some of it was easy, some of it wasn't, because there are streets in 1940 that don't exist anymore. So I needed to use old maps and georeference. Anyway, it was fun. I had to look up whether if I had 2 Shapiros of the same address, is that a 2 flat or is it the same family? Yes, okay. I won't bore you with all of that. So, what do I get? Okay, so if you look at, this is Cincinnati, may I? Okay, yellow is the city of Cincinnati, this is Hamilton County. We have the Cincinnati distinctive Jewish names, and we have Goodmans and Weisses, which actually spread out differently. And I'm not sharing with you the really good statistical data on the difference, but I'll be happy to send it to you if you want. So what we're seeing is, we're seeing cluster here, we start to get dispersal in different areas, right? And ultimately, though, Jews remain clustered. It's now happening less, but 2 things are happening. One is that Jews are actually spreading out of what were identifiable Jewish neighborhoods. Some Jews, other Jews are reclustering tighter. Those would be the modern Orthodox, because they have spatial constraints in terms of where they have to live, right, to be able to walk to shul, clearly. So it's a very interesting pattern of what's going on, and I think in lots of ways it's reflective of American Jewish identity, but I'll leave that to sociologists. I also did Huber and O'Brien. O'Brien is a German name and Huber is Irish. Oh, sorry, it's the other way around, right? And map those patterns. Hubers and O'Briens do not cluster in the way that Jews cluster, right? I just had to prove that, and I had to go back to the library to get all the Hubers and O'Briens. That was also not fun. One more thing I did, okay? 1 minute, 1 minute, okay. One more thing I did was and this is spatial statistics, where I'm basically looking for, I combined I combined the points, the address points, into a hexagonal mesh, and then ran a program that shows me areas where you have high percentages of Jews, hexagons with high percentages, and hexagons of low percentages near each other or far from each other. And one thing that it's showing is the pink here are Jews who are near other Jews. The blues are areas where there are basically Jews on one side and no Jews on the other side. So one thing that this research actually did point out that was not obvious, that we didn't know before, was that Jewish neighborhoods actually had pretty hard and firm boundaries. Unlike other groups where the individuals associated with that ethnic group or religious group are sort of more scattered, where the Jews are clustered, they're clustered tightly, and when you step out of the Jewish neighborhood, there are no Jews. So, just trying to think if there are any more maps that are worth showing. Oh, and then I sort of walked the Jews through different neighborhoods. This is called neighborhood succession, or invasion and succession in urban geography terms, as Jews move through the city. Okay, one more thing I have to show you, I'll do it here, is I also took a subset of the names that I call unique movers. A. Goldstein is not a unique mover from decade to decade, but let's see, Harriet and Albert Goldstein, if I have a Harriet and Albert Goldstein at one address in 1950 and a Harriet and Albert Goldstein at another address in 1960, Harriet and Albert that's the same Harriet and Albert Goldstein, okay? That's a unique mover. So when I look at the unique movers by the distance that they move from one place to another, in each decade, you see how they're moving within a very tight area earlier on. As we move further through the decades, look what happens. Look at the dispersion that continues until they're moving all over the place, and each move is actually a longer distance. Here we have linear directional means. A linear directional mean is essentially the average of all of that, both in direction and in length. And what happened here is that we have the axis of Reading Road, the axis of Montgomery Road, and Jews are they're moving up Reading Road, and then they're shifting that way and going out Montgomery Road. If you don't know Cincinnati, this has no relevance to you. But anyway, so there you go. Thank you. Thank you.